การกดไลค์กดแชร์ส่งอีเมลอัปโหลดรูปเซลฟี่หรือแม้กระทั่งส่งข้อความแชทเพียงไม่กี่ตัวอักษรก็ต้องมีการรับส่งข้อมูลผ่านระบบอินเทอร์เน็ตด้วยกันทั้งนั้นการจะใช้งานผ่านระบบอินเทอร์เน็ตได้ก็จะต้องเข้าเป็นสมาชิกของผู้ให้บริการอินเทอร์เน็ตหรือ ISP จากนั้น ISP ก็จะทำหน้าที่ส่งผ่านข้อมูลไปยัง ISP ปลายทางการส่งข้อมูลข้ามกันไปมาระหว่าง ISP รายหนึ่งไปยังรายอื่นๆส่วนใหญ่ต้องมีการส่งผ่านจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลอินเทอร์เน็ตหรือ Internet Exchange Point ภายในประเทศปัจจุบันประเทศไทยมีระบบจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลภายในประเทศจำนวนมากแต่ทั้งหมดยังใช้เทคโนโลยีในยุคแรกหรือ Layer 3 ซึ่งข้อมูลต้องมีการประมวลผลเพื่อกำหนดเส้นทางใหม่ในทุกๆจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลที่ข้อมูลวิ่งผ่านและการเชื่อมต่อระหว่างผู้ให้บริการในประเทศมีความซับซ้อนซึ่งส่งผลให้คุณภาพอินเทอร์เน็ตในประเทศไทยไม่ดีนักหรือมีความล่าช้าในการรับส่งข้อมูลในหลายๆครั้งข้อมูลอาจจะถูกส่งผ่านหลายทอดและอาจจะผ่านออกไปยังต่างประเทศก่อนแม้จะเป็นเพียงการรับส่งข้อมูลภายในประเทศก็ตาม BKNIX เป็นจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลที่ใช้เทคโนโลยีปัจจุบันหรือ Layer 2 ซึ่งเป็นเทคโนโลยีเดียวกันกับจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลอินเทอร์เน็ตชั้นนำของโลกเป็นระบบที่มีการเชื่อมต่อแบบเรียบง่ายแต่มีประสิทธิภาพสูงใช้การแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลกันโดยตรงโดยไม่มีการประมวลผลเส้นทางช้าไปมาและยังรองรับผู้ให้บริการจำนวนมากพร้อมๆกันก่อให้เกิดผู้ให้บริการรายใหม่ๆขึ้นได้ง่ายโดยการทำงานรูปแบบนี้ทำให้เกิดความรวดเร็วในการส่งผ่านข้อมูลเกิดความประทับใจต่อผู้ใช้งานนอกจากนี้ BKNIX ยังบริหารโดยองค์กรที่มีนโยบายเป็นกลางซึ่งก็คือมูลนิธิศูนย์สารสนเทศเครือข่ายไทยผู้ให้บริการจะสามารถเชื่อมต่อกับ BKNIX ได้โดยอิสระจะใช้สื่อสัญญาณจากบริษัทใดก็ได้ทำให้ผู้ให้บริการอินเทอร์เน็ตได้รับความเท่าเทียมกันในการเชื่อมต่อในอนาคตด้วยความเหมาะสมทางภูมิศาสตร์และประสิทธิภาพของการแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลอินเทอร์เน็ตจากเทคโนโลยีที่ BKNIX เลือกใช้รวมถึงนโยบายที่เป็นกลางจะทำให้ประเทศไทยมีศักยภาพเพียงพอที่จะเป็นจุดศูนย์กลางในการแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลหรือเป็นหับให้กับกลุ่มประเทศเอเชียอาคเนย์โดย BKNIX จะกลายเป็นโครงสร้างพื้นฐานที่สำคัญในการขับเคลื่อนเศรษฐกิจดิจิทัลทั้งในประเทศและระดับภูมิภาคให้เติบโตได้อย่างก้าวกระโดดการกดไลค์กดแชร์ส่งอีเมลอัปโหลดรูปเซลฟี่หรือแม้กระทั่งส่งข้อความแชทเพียงไม่กี่ตัวอักษรก็ต้องมีการรับส่งข้อมูลผ่านระบบอินเทอร์เน็ตด้วยกันทั้งนั้นการจะใช้งานผ่านระบบอินเทอร์เน็ตได้ก็จะต้องเข้าเป็นสมาชิกของผู้ให้บริการอินเทอร์เน็ตหรือ ISP จากนั้น ISP ก็จะทำหน้าที่ส่งผ่านข้อมูลไปยัง ISP ปลายทางการส่งข้อมูลข้ามกันไปมาระหว่าง ISP รายหนึ่งไปยังรายอื่นๆส่วนใหญ่ต้องมีการส่งผ่านจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลอินเทอร์เน็ตหรือ Internet Exchange Point ภายในประเทศปัจจุบันประเทศไทยมีระบบจุดแลกเปลี่ยนข้อมูลภายในประเทศจำนวนมากแต่ทั้งหมดยังใช้
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you have proceed to your seat, we will begin the opening session soon. Okay, so this is the BKNIX Peering Forum 2019, and may I introduce myself? My name is Panita Pongpaibu. I will be your host for today. And this is the fourth Peering Forum in Thailand, and it is organized by the local Thai organizations, which are the Thai Network Information Center Foundation, or we call it THNIC Foundation, and the BKNIX Company Limited. Together with the support of many locals and international organizations, we are hosting the BKNIX Peering Forum 2019 today. And with today's event, you may find very interesting topics, including securing internet routing, mutually agreed norms for routing security, peering DB, transit trend, 5G-driven mechanism, and some panel discussion. So to get the full benefit of this peering forum, you have a chance to set up private meetings with your peers You can do this by using the meeting booking system at the website. The website is peeringforum.bknix.co.th. This meeting booking system will help you organize private meeting sessions. And for some internet access, you may find the Wi-Fi password written at the back of your badge. Please keep your badge in place at all times. Also, there is a barcode in the back of your badge, if you can find it, for the website. And you can check the program and the bio of the speakers in the website. And for the last announcement, I would like to tell you about today's evening. There will be a beer and cocktail at the 20th floor restaurant called The Sky. So this cocktail reception will be open for participants who had an invitation card or who have registered for the reception. Okay, and now is the right moment for the opening of BKNX Peering Forum 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Associate Professor Surasak Sangwanpong. He's the committee member of the THNIC Foundation.
Hello. Dr. Paul Vixie, Chairman, CEO, and co-founder of Fireside Security. Mr. Paul Vinson, Director General APNIX. Mr. Philip Smith, Senior Network Engineer and Training Coordinator from Network Startup Resource Center, or NSRC. And Vice Marshal Thanapan Rajaran, Deputy Secretary General of Regional and Spectrum Management, Office of the Type of the National Broadcasting and Telecommunication Commission. THNIC Foundation Board of Directors, Honorable Speaker, BKNX members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is my great pleasure that we are here together in Bangkok again today, being a witness of the growth of the BKNX as the first neutral internet exchange in Thailand. The BKNX is stepping into its fourth year of operation and services, as well as this is the fourth BKNX Peering Forum ever organized for the knowledge exchanging, networking, and business opportunity between communities. In terms of the growth of the BKNX, we welcome 7 new members in the past year. Presently, 25 members are connecting to our 2 points of presence with nearly 40 gigabit per second of peak traffic. Since last year, our operation comply with the managed routing practice. We also facilitated the Bangkok IETF 103 meeting by being the local traffic exchange. We still keep on developing our services to be of a higher standard. Our main philosophy is to lessen the complication of Thai internet connectivities, reducing latency time, local internet exchange, and internet services costs. BKNX participants benefit from Peering Forum, which bring together our members, partners, and all parties in the internet, including ISPs, CDN, IDC, carriers, and IXP, to discuss and update the recent technology and policies. This forum is in conjunction with 3 events: the Thai Knox Day, 3 days Cyber Security Workshop, and the 3-day BGP Peering Workshop. This year, we welcome more than 200 registrations from 14 economies, namely Australia, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Ghana, Hong Kong, India, Japan, Malaysia, Myanmar, Russia, Singapore, Thailand, USA, and Vietnam. This event could not be successful without support from our valued community partners and sponsors. Please join me in thanking to Symphony, NBTC, APNIX, Facebook, Netflix, NTT Communication Thailand, TCC Technology, 3BB, Akamai, AWS, INET, Internet Society, SuperNAP, Farsight Security, THNIC Company, and NSRC for their generosity. I would like also to thank AWS and Internet Society as the fellowship sponsor in this year. On behalf of THNIC Foundation and BKNX, I sincerely wish you a rewarding meeting and enjoyable time and want to express a special thank you for added value your presence will bring to the meeting forum. Thank you for your participation.
Okay, thank you for Professor Surasak Sungwonpong for the opening speech. And now, BKNX Peering Forum 2019 is officially kicked off. We now will start with the keynote speech. Our keynote speaker is Dr. Paul Vixie. He is an internet pioneer. Currently, he is the chairman, CEO, and co-founder of Farsight Security. And his talk will be on the DNS as a defense tool. Please welcome Mr. Paul Vixie.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. There we go. All right. So it's a special honor to address an audience that is in a peering internet exchange because I was in that business myself in Palo Alto, California a few decades ago. Things were very different then. It would have been hard to assemble this number of people in the whole world who understood what we were doing when at that time. And now I see that there's a vibrant community full of people who understand the value of local connectivity, the value both technically and economically and politically. So again, a special pleasure for me. I come from the domain name system. I worked on Bind for, I don't know, about 10 years in the 1990s. And during that time, I also started an anti-spam company. That was the first. So later on, when I had pretty much hired everyone who was going to be needed to take care of Bind after me, I decided to go back into security. And since 2008, I have been focused on a different aspect of DNS, not how to implement it or how to extend it, or even how to protect it, but rather how to use DNS as a way to protect other things. So that ultimately resulted in the creation of Farsight Security, whose mission that is, and it also occasions this presentation, where I hope that I will inform all of you the importance of the role DNS plays, what you can do to sort of keep yourself safe using DNS, and maybe some special ways that DNS can be used harmfully if you are not extremely cautious. So with that, let me first talk a little bit about sort of DNS itself. You don't need to know very much in terms of DNS technological detail to follow this presentation, but there is a small bit that you must know, and I'll try to get through it as painlessly as possible. So the first thing to understand, and in this audience I suspect you certainly do, is that everything that we do on the internet, like email or websites or anything that looks like a continuous experience, is actually performed discreetly down on the wire. In other words, everything that we see as a unit actually has component parts. Those parts are called packets. And the most cogent, useful definition of the internet is to describe a series of networks that are connected to each other, which is the largest such network speaking the internet protocol. because it's certainly possible to have a private internet just for your corporation or just for your home or maybe just for your mobile network in your car. But it's really when a lot of these networks are connected together that you have an internet, and the largest such internet is the internet. Now these are subtle details, but they will come back to us. Every one of those IP packets has some addresses. It's got an address where it pretends that it came from, which is usually wrong in the case of a denial of service attack. And it has the address that it is trying to get to, and that is what our routers concern themselves with in terms of choosing a next hop or a peer at an internet exchange. And as I said, everything that we can see on the internet is really made up of these packets. And that means that the part we can use is an overlay on top of a part that would make no sense to a human. And DNS is also an overlay, and it's a very special overlay because the internet needs DNS and the DNS needs internet, so it is interwoven. It's a mutual dependency. So all of the things that we do, every click of our browser, every send key in our email client, everything that we do on the on the internet begins with a DNS transaction. Now, often we do not see those DNS transactions ourselves. It's fairly rare outside of this room for somebody to go to a command line tool and say, do a DNS lookup, I want to see the answer. It's a diagnostic activity. Most of the time our applications are doing this silently behind the scenes. And there's been a change since the beginning of the mobile IP era in approximately 2010, because in the old days, you would see perhaps on the side of a soda can, you would have a web address, www.coca-cola.com or something like that. And it was conceivable by the marketing department of that soda company that you might go to a web browser and type in that web address. And we saw those web addresses all over the place in that era, but that ended with search. And it would be easy to make the mistake of thinking that since we no longer have to type these names in, we no longer have to look at them, somehow DNS has lost relevance in the new age. The reverse is true. DNS is bigger than ever, and it is used more than ever, and it grows faster than ever. However, we no longer see it, and that I think is good user interface design. Just as we don't appreciate having to type in an IP address, or perhaps if we're using a mobile phone, type in the phone number of somebody we want to call, so it is on the internet that you're mostly relying on search, but you must keep in the back of your mind that search is only possible because all of those websites are linked together, and that linking uses the DNS. Now, we have some disadvantages in the internet infrastructure. There are certainly some areas that show clearly that it was originally a scientific network. None is as glaringly obvious as Whois. For many years now, Whois has declined in value, such that if someone uses a domain name in a way that bothers you, perhaps it's a crime, perhaps it's just spam, but whatever it is you'd like to complain, you will often find that the Whois for the domain name is false or missing or goes to a proxy. And for the people who wish to behave without recourse on the internet, that is good. And it is those people who have put most of the downward pressure on the utility of Whois itself. DNS, however, has a different set of rules. If you lie to DNS, if you omit information, if you try to use a proxy to hide your infrastructure, then you will not be reachable. In other words, you must speak truth to the DNS. And those truths are expressed somewhat rigorously. There's very little in the way of free text, as there would be in Whois. So although you can have Whois privacy, you really can't have DNS privacy. If you are on the network, then you as a potential malevolent actor have very few options that will keep people from being able to seek recourse against you if you misbehave. That is probably the most important reason why I've chosen to study the use of DNS as a way to secure other parts of the internet. So I would have probably enjoyed, although been surprised by an alternative future, not the one we're living, but the one where the internet came along and only good people used it. But that did not happen. In fact, the internet is for everybody, criminals and non-criminals alike. And there was really no way we could reach into this new information age that we're in and leave the sort of the ugly criminal force and fraud of the pre-internet age behind us. All of those people, all of those desires came with us into this new age. And I'm sad to say that bad actors have actually made better use of the internet than good actors. They have amplified their success and their activities more so than we have. We are largely passive. We're not looking generally for ways that the internet can be leveraged to accelerate whatever it was we were doing before. The bad guys are doing that. Now, as I've mentioned, everything we do on the internet starts with a DNS transaction, even if we don't see it. And it happens so fast that we rarely even have to contemplate it. But when I say everything, I mean everything. All good acts, all malevolent acts require working DNS. No criminal is going to be able to find victims if they don't put some material into the DNS so that their assets can be found by their prospective victims. And we have helped them. I am particularly disturbed by the cheap throwaway domain names that are widely available. They are literally now so cheap that no criminal really considers the cost of a few thousand or a few tens of thousands of domain names as part of the construction of some new malicious infrastructure. That was not always so. It used to be that domain names were expensive enough that you had to carefully consider whether you really needed one. Now you don't. And we have seen evidence of DNS registrars that cater to the criminal element. They will often pretend that they are legitimate businesses, even though they know that their customers are criminals. Sometimes the registrar is actually a front for a criminal gang. And there's a long and difficult process of trying to remove such a registrar, which gives them a lot of first mover advantage. Because if you control the registrar, then you have a lot more options in terms of protecting the privacy of your supposed customers. I mentioned that DNS has a rigorous internal structure, and Francis Bacon informs us that nature to be commanded must be obeyed. So let me give you some of the invariants that even criminals must obey, because this underlies the rest of what I want to tell you today. So first, although we will tend to think of domain names as singletons, as though they exist apart from all other domain names, they are in groups, and those groups are known as zones. So when you have a group of related domain names where the relationship is that they are all maintained by the same system administrator, then it's probable that they are all in the same zone. And I can tell you, for example, that any single word ending followed by .com is in the com zone. That's the rule for .com. Also .net and .org and a lot of other top-level domains work the same way. But it need not be only one word. As an example, in the United Kingdom, they have co.uk, which is a zone separate from UK. And it's important in your work, if you intend to use DNS as a way to seek recourse against online bad actors, it's important that you know what a zone is and know how to find the edges of it. And I'll be explaining a little bit more about that. Every zone is served by some name servers. This is where the data comes into the DNS from the outside that then sort of gives the DNS its capability and its map. It's what allows it to be a map of the internet as a territory, is that somehow you're able to feed information into it, and that is done through these name servers. And the name servers, of course, have addresses, because if you're going to reach an internet-connected device, you will not be reaching it by name. You will have to reach it by an IP address. The IP packets I told you about earlier don't have names as their destinations. They have addresses. Now, there are other things besides name servers that have addresses. For example, the web server for APNIC, Paul Wilson is our Director General there, also has an address, and that is not used for name service. So what that means for you as a potential investigator is that when you see an association between a name and an address, you must know that it could be used as a name server, but it need not be. Finally, IP addresses are also not singletons. It's easy for us to believe that an IP address is as unrelated to all others as perhaps a cell phone number would be. That is not the case. And those of you who are in the peering business know that you're sending advertisements via BGP to your peers or to a route server that consist of net blocks, and those blocks of networks have a size that is a power of 2. I'm hoping that you don't see anything in your routing table from your peers that is a /24 or a /28, because the smaller they are, the more of them you need, and then the more router resources you will need, and that turns into a nightmare. But you will see net blocks of this size inside of providers. And so once you get away from the internet core where BGP is spoken, it'll turn out that a very small group of addresses is assigned to a single, essentially, system administrator who then has the ability to build a network on those addresses. So that's it. Those are the invariants that bad guys have to observe when they are using the DNS. And because they have to observe those, they leave some interesting sort of trails that we can follow. Now let me mention in passing that the DNS itself is not secure yet. We've been working on it for 22 years. It's called DNSSEC. It is a little bit of an ugly protocol because it has taken so long and it's had so many cooks in the soup, but it's something you should do. It would be much better if inauthentic data could not traverse the DNS and perhaps fool a user or an application into connecting to something that was not truly the destination that they should be connecting to. And so I certainly recommend that you deploy DNSSEC both in your name servers that look things up, which are called recursive servers, where you turn on validation, and also the name servers where you inject your data into the DNS. Those are called authority servers. They both have a role in DNSSEC, and you should certainly progress that, but I'm not going to say more about that today because that is a separate topic. That's how to secure DNS, and I'm going to talk instead about how to use DNS to secure other things. So if you came here expecting detail on this, then what you really need to sign up for is the 3-day DNS and security workshop that will follow this tomorrow and the next 2 days. Okay, so I've mentioned a couple of server types. Let me explain that everybody is in this business, whether they mean to be or not. These are the ones who mean to be. I told you that the answers have to come from outside the system. That's that top box. That is where information comes out of a text file, or perhaps some software that you've written, or perhaps a database. It doesn't really matter to the DNS where you get your data. What matters is that you put it into an authority server so that the rest of the system can reach your data. The questions, on the other hand, are coming in from the bottom. Those stub resolvers are everywhere. So every single powered device that you have on your body right now has at least one stub resolver in it. And that stub resolver starts out with very little information. All it knows is the address of the recursive server it should use. and it is going to send all of its questions to that server or whatever set of servers. And those servers are usually told to your smartphone, for example, by your 4G provider. If you're on Wi-Fi, it's told to you with the DHCP assignment that came from the Wi-Fi provider or whatever your network is. Many of us override those choices and decide that we want to pick a recursive server for our stub. And you might choose 1.1 or 8.8 or 9.9. There's a lot of them out there. And they each have a different claim for your attention. OpenDNS was actually the first one to do this on a wide scale, but they did not pick a memorable number, and so they're not growing as fast as the ones that are quad 9 or quad 8 or quad 1. So that's an interesting human factors experiment. But the point is, the data that passes between your stub and that recursive server is personally identifiable information. The IP address of your stub resolver can be tied to you as a person through various forwarding tables and ARP tables and whatnot. It's possible for a network administrator to know what device, and therefore who owns the device that was using an IP address at the time that a query was sent. And so when you send a query from the stub resolver to the recursive server, you are giving away your personal information to the operator of that recursive server. It is therefore my advice that you have a contract of some kind with that recursive server operator, or do what I do, which is to simply run your own. It's not that difficult. Certainly the people in this room would not find it a challenge to run a local version of Unbound on your laptop, or Bind, or whatever you prefer. Right, so this is it. Although there will be several trillion packets, transactions in DNS today, and there will be many tens of millions of speakers, maybe billions of speakers as far as the stub resolvers. They all have to speak the same protocol, and every one of them fits into one of the three categories I've given you here. So that, again, informs our perspective as defenders wishing to use DNS as a way to secure other things. Now, I do want to say, in my own defense, that I see this differently than some others, and I have been focused very much on adding more logic to that recursive name server. And what you see here is that we like to monitor the activities of the recursive server. We like to analyze what we're seeing, sometimes with some history involved, maybe some machine learning, whatever analysis suits you. And then finally, to generate some policy, because it turns out that once you know that there are criminals out there that are using the DNS, it might be in your advantage to not respect their content. It might be that the best way to protect some of your stub resolvers is to have your recursive server have some policy that says, you know, if the answer contains an IP address that's in a certain /20 that I know belongs to somebody who is a criminal, I'm just going to fail that transaction and let my stub find other work to do. So this is our perspective in my company. This is what we think is happening. And because of the desire to do that monitoring and that policy, and because of the desire to keep the PII close to home, personally identifiable information, we always recommend that everyone should run their own name server. And if you're not, then you should pick one very close, such as belonging to your ISP, rather than one that's very far away, such as an American tech company in California. I probably won't come back to that today, but there's a lot going on as far as various bodies trying to take control of the DNS resolution path, and that recursive server in the middle of this picture is where that war is fought. All right, let's talk about rate limiting. We have the problem of DDoS, obviously. The source addresses of the packets that we inject into the internet core are generally not validated before they reach the internet core. Because the only place you can be sure that an address was wrong is out in the edge, where the packet is first entering the internet. And if that person does not see any advantage to trying to sort of keep fake source addresses out, then no one further on is going to be able to tell. There's only one opportunity to get to keep those from going into the core, and most of the people in that role have no incentive whatsoever to keep them out. And that means that we're all getting DDoSed. Sometimes the DDoS reaches the newspaper headlines, and you'll read about some number of gigabits or hundreds of gigabits of traffic that was used to attack maybe Spamhaus or some other operator somewhere. It is extremely expensive to stop these attacks. And so one of the things that we do when we operate these authority servers, which again is that top box there where the data comes from, when we deploy those, we buy the biggest server we can and we put it on the fattest network connection we can, or we put it very close to an internet exchange so that it has a lot of connectivity splay 1 or 2 hops away. And most of the reason we have to do that is that if we are DDoSed, we don't want to be unreachable to our customers. We want to have enough capacity to serve both natural, correct, non-attack traffic and to withstand an attack simultaneously. What that means is that we are aligning our actions with the interests of attackers. I know that sounds strange because we thought we were defending ourselves, but what we're also doing is to create a wonderful DDoS reflector, because we have to build an extraordinarily over-provisioned authority server in order that we be up when somebody who is attacking us wants us to be down. But once we've done that, we will be very good at amplifying attacks that don't hurt us particularly, but will massively damage someone else. And when I say amplify, I mean that if somebody forges, let's say that I forge a packet using Paul Wilson's source address, and I inject it into the network, and I send one packet to each of you, pretending to be from him, asking what is the, name server set for apnic.net or something like that, you will all answer him. And your answers will be much larger than my questions. And he will have no recourse, because he's not going to call every one of you and say, could you please stop DDoSing me? And if he did, you wouldn't know how to do it. There isn't a way for you to stop. So, because other people's networks don't have source address validation, your authority server is a perfect, purpose-built DNS DDoS reflecting amplifier. And this was used for most DNS-related attacks for many years. We created, myself and Vernon Shriver, some technology called response rate limiting, which simply tries to guess using very simple, very inexpensive heuristics, tries to guess whether the packet, the name service request that we just heard should really have been heard. And what that means is that we're trying to remember some previous state. Have we answered this question for this requester recently? Because if so, they should have a cache. They should have remembered what we said. And so the heuristics are very simple, and they're gameable. I want to say that if an attacker wanted to use a name server for reflecting, amplifying DDoS, and it was running this technology, there are some patterns they could use that would bypass our logic. We're not seeing that yet, but we know that it's theoretically possible. So I have a story here, which is from a colleague at Afilias. They were a support customer when I was running the Internet Systems Consortium. So they were running Bind as one of their authority servers for the .info zone. And they were getting a lot of complaints. People were calling them all the time, would you please stop DDoSing us? And, they're in a terrible position here because what they're doing is answering the questions they're getting. And so all they could really tell someone if they complained was, all right, so I'm answering the questions that appear to be coming from your network. Would you like me to stop doing that? And that is a very sharp, pointy question, because if you stop doing that, then they won't be able to see anything in .info. Now, frankly, losing everything in .info would not be a huge loss for most of us, but it is nevertheless one we won't accept on behalf of our customers, because then we start getting complaints. So it tends to be there's nothing anybody can do. So in this picture, the x-axis is time and the y-axis is volume. And below the 0 point, you're seeing the query load across all of the .info servers. And above the 0 point, you're seeing the responses. So it's probably hard for you to see from your distance, but I'll tell you that the query load is between 100 and 250 megabits per second. That is not a reasonable number. If you see a number that is that big for any zone, you know that a lot of the transactions you're hearing are wasted. They could be malicious, they could be accidental, but there's certainly some kind of error. And what you'll see on Thursday afternoon is that I mentioned that we had this logic on some mailing list somewhere, and I got a call from somebody at Infoblox who said, we got to have that now. I said, well, look, you know, I've been working with Infoblox for years. You're one of my best bind customers. And I know that you're going to take this logic and stick it in a test lab for 6 months before you are going to let it onto your network, which is a reasonable practice, by the way. I'm not complaining. But given that we've got that much delay ahead of us, I'm not going to give you this patch until I've tested it a little bit more. And they said, let's start back at the beginning of this conversation. We need the patch right now. And so I said, well, okay, it's your funeral. And I gave them the patch. And on Thursday afternoon, they put the patch in place. And you'll see that although the query volume continues as before, the response volume is much smaller. In fact, the response volume is to the actual questions that were actually being asked that weren't part of a DDoS. And I talked to them later and I said, how many complaints did you get? How many times did my rate limiting logic forbid your server to answer a question that was not a DDoS? And he said 0. No one complained. So our easy guesses turned out to be right. So this logic is in bind, it's in NSD, it's in CNOT. You can do this in Powered DNS, although it requires using something called Lua. And it's not the default on all of those systems. If you're running an authority name server, you are almost certainly being abused in this way. You should look into response rate limiting. When we put this into the root name servers, it showed that perhaps 80% of our volume over time had been DDoS, because there's always about 1,000 DDoSes going on. A lot of them are very small. And you are certainly, if you run an authority server, you have been mapped, you've been found, and you're being used in this way. But you're deliberately being used in a way that helps you to harm others, but does not harm you, because it's like a parasite. They don't want to injure their host body. So again, you must turn this on if it isn't on by default. So how much time have I got? No clock. Oh. Okay. So a lot of things have been put into the DNS for reasons that you would not approve of. Like it was put into the DNS so that there would be a unique address to use when sending you a small 1-by-1 image in some email message so that somebody could track you, and they need a unique domain name to do that with. Or they could have created a domain name just for the purpose of bypassing the spam assassin rule that forbids raw IP addresses in the bodies of email messages. Ultimately, we have a, there's this thing where you can create a domain name by paying some registrar somewhere, maybe it's GoDaddy or whoever is your preferred registrar, and it will be live within 30 seconds. That did not used to be the case. It used to take 3 days. It used to be that the ComNet and org zones were only released on Tuesdays and Fridays, and that was back when it was part of SRI in Menlo Park, so before commercialization, and that was just the culture, and that was our norm. But when .biz and .info and all the others started to come into existence, they they were looking for a competitive advantage, and they said, well, could we release more often? Sure, let's release every day, and then we can talk about how much faster we are than .com at creating new names. And so the .com people saw this and said, why do we only release Tuesdays and Fridays? And someone else said, I don't know, we've always done it that way. Well, how often could we release? Oh, I don't know, let's do it every hour. And so you can see that this was a game of one-upmanship strictly for market share reasons and bragging rights. We eventually reached the 30-second point. The reason that we did not continue beyond 30 seconds is that we do not have faster than light travel. I promise that if and when we have faster than light travel, the first use will be to reduce this 30-second number down to 1 second. The problem is there is no non-malicious use case for a 30-second turnaround, right? None of you is ever going to spend some time developing a new application or new content for the web and then get to the day that you need to release it and not have the domain name. In fact, the way this really works inside of companies is that if you can't get the domain name, you won't even begin working on the project because that's part of your branding. So the only people who need 30-second turnaround are the ones against whom you need recourse. So we really did, again, align our actions with the interests of the people who are trying to steal from us. This is sort of the madness of crowds, and it works every time. And we can't prevent this stuff from coming in the other side. And we've seen some action trying to create a takedown industry that people who operate the .tk namespace have a takedown service where any security company can access the API and take down any .tk name without giving a reason. And they can do it all day long, and there's no fee, there's just nothing, it's just wide open. The reason they do this is that the faster that we kill them, then the more they can sell. So again, we're aligning our actions with the interests of the people who are trying to hurt us. So we need a different solution. So if you can't stop it at the far end, you're going to be stopping it on your own doorstep. So how do we do that? Well, I mentioned that I started the first anti-spam company back in the 90s. We developed something called the Real-Time Black Hole List, the RBL. And that RBL has been used to protect every piece of email you have received in the last 20 years and every piece of email you will receive in the rest of your lives. So perhaps I ought to have patented that technique. But aside from that, we realized that same general idea would work for a recursive name server. In other words, the RBL was a policy feed that allowed you to mark an IP address as being potentially spammy, and then to subscribe using your mail server to that policy feed so that you would just reject mail from spammy places. It didn't work. You may have noticed you're still getting spam. So I did not solve the spam problem, but we did create distributed reputations as a internet market segment. And so now we have filled it with something called RPZ. RPZ is named by programmers. It stands for Response Policy Zones, which is an absolutely correct and yet meaningless term, so you know programmers were involved. And it's designed to allow many publishers who have intelligence data about names, about name servers, about IP address blocks, about, in other words, indicators, to push their threat intelligence out to a set of customers in a very lightweight manner. And this system is designed to allow any number of publishers to reach any number of subscribers so that you can essentially centralize, based on skill sets, the task of deciding what indicators are dangerous. And as long as you trust your provider, then you can subscribe to as many of these as you want. Again, because the bad guys have to use DNS, we are able to find out what they depend on and poison those indicators at scale. So at the end of this presentation, you'll see a set of URLs. One of them is about this, dnsrpz.info. And this technology is free, although I think you'll find that the threat feeds that are in this format are not free. Nevertheless, I recommend you deploy this locally and make your own policy feed. It's just an ugly looking zone file. You can edit it with VI, and that will give you the ability in your own security operations center to poison certain indicators that you know are being leveraged to injure you or your customers or your employees or your family. So even if you decide not to subscribe to any external policy feed, you should certainly create one for yourself and subscribe to that. And there are some details here as far as, all firewalls tend to have a set of rules where every rule is introduced by a trigger. In other words, how do I know that I should be behaving differently? And then some actions. What is the difference in my behavior? So what you'll see most often is to say that if the domain name is star.example.com, where you know that those example.com people are horrible people, then I want to lie. I want my recursive server to tell my stubs that that name doesn't exist. And so yes, we are lying, but I think it's a constructive lie in this case. The other thing that we do fairly often is if we think that some customer, some LIR, local internet registry, has gotten their hands on some of APNIC's address space or some of RIPE's or some of Aaron's address space, and they're using it only for crime. And if you call RIPE, they will say, hey, we're not the network policeman. We don't care how it's being used, as long as the WHOIS data is up to date. So what that would mean is that we could say, look, I don't care what the name is. I don't care. I have no idea what name this criminal is going to use, but I know the answer will be an address in that /20. And in that case, I want to again lie. I want to say something that is not the truth. I could lie and say it doesn't exist, or I could respond with my own address, maybe direct people to a takedown page saying, hey, this is bad content. You clicked on something you shouldn't have. There's a lot of options here. And it is essential, because the bad guys are so much better at using the internet to amplify their activities than the good guys have been at amplifying our activities. It is essential that we take back the DNS and that we find a way to give preferentially terrible DNS service to the people who are abusing this collective resource in a very non-cooperative way. So again, I'm not going to go through these in detail. This is all technical information that you can find. The technology I'm describing is open source. It's in bind. It can be had in Unbound. It's in NOT. And it can be done in PowerDNS. And it can even be done on the Microsoft built-in name server. So you have a lot of options. There's nothing that you have to buy differently in order to start using this. So the only certain investment you have to make is your time, and I think it will be well repaid. So there are some people who have found a way to predict domain generation algorithm names. So if you have a botnet that's going to be using some random looking computed name to find its command and control server, there are providers out there who will sell you an RPZ feed that will make sure you don't resolve those names, which might be helpful if you're a big network and you have no idea how many infections you have, but you want to make sure that none of them are able to contact their command and control server. We operated one of these for the Conficker worm, which you may have heard about in 2009. And I want to say that at its height, we were seeing 11 million unique IPs a day, so that was the approximate size of the botnet. We eventually got it down to 800,000 unique IPs per day, and that is the size of the Conficker botnet even today. So it may pay you to not resolve the names that Conficker is going to use tomorrow, but you won't be doing that by editing your config files every day. You need some kind of a pub/sub, publish and subscribe method to synchronize the policy of your name servers with the information, the thread information that either you or your vendors are providing. There are a whole bunch of other ways this can be used. So since you're in this room, you probably have people in your company who enjoy fiddling around with Python scripts or Perl scripts, depending on how old they are. And you will find that the sky's the limit in terms of how much complexity and finesse you can apply to not resolving bad names. I have found that certain name servers should not be used, and so I've poisoned various name servers that can no longer be reached from my house. If your zone is served by that name server, you are a bad person, and I don't want to talk to your content. That's a wonderful power. You should use it. All right. Seem to be doing okay on time. So I will say that the standard is in flux. We wrote an internet draft, which will become an RFC, but it's been difficult to get the IETF to adopt this because it is somewhat controversial. We are, after all, trying to describe ways to make things fail rather than ways to make things work. And so it's taken a few years to get ourselves through that process. However, there will be an RFC, and all of the existing implementers, all the name servers that can process RPZ, all understand the same format. So I don't think there's a standards risk here for you. So now, finally, I want to talk about DNS as observed, because I showed you a picture where we were monitoring, analyzing, and then creating policy. Here's the smaller version of that picture. Again, you see the three-level hierarchy, the stubs on the bottom, the authorities on the top. Questions come from the bottom, answers come from the top. They meet in the middle. What we do is a little different from what some of the other DNS monitoring projects do. We only look at the data above the recursive because we don't want that PII. I literally will not allow personally identifiable information on my network. There are some passive DNS providers who do, and certainly unless you are a German citizen, you have no reasonable expectation of privacy when you're using your employer's equipment. And so there's a fair amount of technology out there that looks down in that PII area. Ours can be used that way, and we have customers who do, but we won't accept their data. We make them process it locally. So again, we are not a surveillance company. We are only looking to find the content of the DNS. We never have any record whatsoever of who looked something up. This is frustrating sometimes for law enforcement because they might be able to close cases faster if they knew what user had asked the first question. But if I had that data, then I would have fewer sensor operators because I would be violating personal privacy. So that was the choice we had to make. So we have a whole bunch of different ways that this data is used. And I'll talk about the non-commercial terms because this is not meant to be I'm not here to tell you about my commercial services. So I'll explain the research applications for this at the end. But what I want to say is that there are a lot of people who want to see the real time. But that database at the bottom is the thing that really gets people's attention. What we're doing is we're grabbing these cache miss transactions that come up from a recursive server if someone asks them a question that no one else has asked recently and they have to go running around in the authority network to find the data. That ultimately goes into a database that we've been keeping since 2010. And that database, as you would expect, is fully cross-referenced. And it gives you the ability to ask questions like this one. So what you're seeing here is my command line utility that is talking to the database and then formatting the output in the same format as a DNS zone file. So if you've ever used the dig utility, then you're familiar with looking at data in this format. The actual underlying format is JSON, and I'll show you that in a moment. What we've done here is to say, Vix.com, what's the story on that? And the story was that from 2010 in July, when we started this database, to 2013, this was my vanity domain, and it went to some ISC name servers. But then in 2013, it moved over to an internet domain reseller. That's because I wanted a new car, and so I wanted to sell this domain. And I ultimately did. I have a pretty little red Mazda to show for it. But the thing, I don't think I'm a criminal, and so this is not an example of how to catch me at something, but had I been a criminal, then the fact that I had this change in 2013 would tell you as an investigator what else to look at. You would know to focus hard on the months of 2013 because something else was happening in my life that caused me to make this change. And that allows you, essentially, if you were tracking me through a forest somewhere, then you have just come across a trail of breadcrumbs that was left by me, and you can follow that trail. And what's even more important is if the domain name had been killed, let's say I'd used it maliciously and takedown had actually worked and I'd lost it, you wouldn't be able to find any information in the current DNS, but you can find the history here. And the second really important thing is that this did not make any queries to the Vix.com name servers. You were able to look this data up without me, as the owner of this domain name, seeing you do it. Whereas if you are doing after-action forensics, let's say it's a business email compromise and your CFO just clicked on something he shouldn't have, and you want to know what data he saw, then if you make a query, then your query is going to show up in the query logs of the authoritative server, which the bad guy is probably operating. If you make a query of a database like this one, and I'll give you a list of some others, then the bad guy sees nothing. This is strictly passive. This is where we're storing observations and allowing access to those stored observations. So there's some other things. There's a lot of wildcarding that goes on in the DNS, so we have some, but it works the other way around. You can actually ask a generalized question and receive all matching answers. So in this case, I just wanted to find all of the Vix.com names that had an address inside of my Comcast internet connection. This is probably more useful for auditing. In other words, I might do this to find out, do I still have all that machinery? Can I take these names out? But if it's a bad guy, you could also use this kind of thing to find out where they host and what else they host there that is maybe not a name that you knew before you went. You can look on the right-hand side. This is a real query that I really did because I was upgrading my postfix SMTP server, and I just did not believe that my configurations were right. So I wanted to find out what domains do I actually have so that I can make sure that I receive email for all of them. So this was an auditing purpose, but I think you can imagine that if you were chasing a bad guy who had their own mail server, you might love to be able to find out what are all the domain names that he has got pointing to that mail server. So I have friends at the FBI, and I thought that I would demonstrate this tool to them. So in this case, I'm doing an address lookup. You see that /24, that's a CIDR address. And all I wanted to know is what are all the names that have addresses that end in that /24? Now it turned out there were hundreds of them because of a program they have called InfraGard. So you can see that I'm now grep -v on that to get rid of that. That's what was left. So I thought, this is pretty clean. And I went a little deeper and I said, all right, let's take a look at your ic.fbi.gov mail server, because that's what shows up on an FBI person's business card. And I thought, wow, in the whole history of my database, you've only had one mail server. That is a very low rate of churn. You're running a very clean shop. Then I thought, you know, what else, what address is that mail server going to, and what else goes there? And then I asked them the question, what is ncijtf.fbi.gov? And what they wanted to know is, how did I find that? Because that was not a name that they had published in any of their press releases to that date. And I just said, look, if it's in use and it's in the DNS, then everybody sees it. So again, the FBI to me is not a criminal, but it's an example of infrastructure mapping that you can do without tipping off the target of your investigation. I mentioned that the real format is not this weird zone file notation. If you add the -J, it will turn off the conversion and you get to see what your program would be seeing if you wrote some kind of a Python script to use this in your own workflow. So I didn't know what JSON was, but one of our guys, this was done in 2010, one of our guys knew and built a good system, and we've been upgrading it ever since. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about where else it is. There is the Farsight server. There's one at Qihu 360. There's one at nic.at. There's one at CERCLU in Luxembourg. There are a lot of passive DNS systems. We have published an internet draft on the particular JSON schema that we're using, and we have got co-authors from several of those other projects because we all agree that we should not be competing in some kind of a lock-in kind of way. We'd like it to be possible for somebody who wants to use DNS, passive DNS, in their workflow to write one program and then decide later which of our systems they're going to use it against. And so we're attempting to standardize the schema. That is going to be the topic of a meeting. There's a SIG DNS meeting at FIRST in Edinburgh this summer, and I'm hoping that we're going to close this up and finish that process and get that RFC out the door. Our own database obviously has commercial users. That's how I pay salaries, but that's not why I'm here. What I want to tell you is that if you're a student, probably a grad student, and your advisor agrees, then you can use our data to help get your thesis done. And we love it when that happens. We ask to be mentioned in the thesis, but that's the only payment we require. And we will give you access to the database if you just run a sensor, because the more we see, the better our database is. And you know, since we're not collecting PII, we have had pretty good luck talking to university provosts and legal teams where they talk about the importance of student privacy, and yeah, we're protecting student privacy just fine. And of course, we make it commercially available, but for the purpose of this meeting, I would just love to see all of you adopt this technology, even if you don't run a sensor, even if you use some database that isn't ours. Just use this because the bad guys are winning, and the trend is worsening. They are winning more year by year, and this is the kind of structural change we can make in the way that we cooperate and share information that could maybe get us back to the point where we win some of the time. Now, as I mentioned, there are some URLs. I will send this slide deck to the organizers, so don't feel like you have to write these down. But I'm going to leave these up for a few minutes of questions. All right, since nobody raised their hand, Phil Smith, what's your question? Nothing? No?
Okay, if nobody has question, please give a big hand for, okay, please.
I was counting on you. Can somebody get that man a microphone? Oh, that's fine. Oh, that one. Okay.
No, this is taking you back to a bit earlier in your keynote. It was just more the question about, you were talking about a lot of the public resolvers and around about those. I was just sitting there hoping maybe you would just expand a little bit more about some of the issues with those, like what are the issues with, say, 888, 999? Because many places I go, a lot of workshops I'm doing about, say, university infrastructure, so many universities are now just handing out 8888 to the students and the staff. And then they're complaining during the workshops, ooh, the internet's very slow. And that's the general type of thing. So do you want to expand on that one a little bit? Because I think it's quite important.
So expanding on that is easy. Expanding on it only a little is the hard part. So sending your PII to a non-contracted party is foolishness, and you should never do it. And that's the simple answer. But the more complex answer is that a lot of people between you and the closest Anycast version of 888 or 999 or 111 are going to be able to monitor that traffic, maybe even interfere with it, maybe even answer it locally. And what that means is that to keep that relationship safe, you have to encrypt it, which in turn means you're using TCP, not UDP. So you're susceptible to some head-of-line blocking problems that will be solved in QUIC, but probably will never be solved in TCP. So you're adding complexity to deal with the costs of the complexity you added before. That should seem like folly. It should seem like I'm just adding more load, I'm carrying a heavier and heavier burden and a lot more external dependencies because I chose to start down the path of having external dependencies in the first place. So, I really want to put us back in the mid-90s for a moment and say that before we commercialized and privatized the internet, there were no ISPs. Everybody had an internet connection of some kind, and if you were using DNS, you had to run your own server because your ISP didn't exist yet, so there was no ISP name server to use. That worked fine. It still works fine. Nothing has changed. Moving your name server further away from the place where the queries are coming from is in OpenDNS's interests, it's in Google's interests, it's in Cloudflare's interests, it's in IBM's interests, but it's not in your interests. So if you lack the confidence to run your own name server, there are plenty of virtual images out there that you can simply download and put into your internal cloud. They will automatically update themselves from time to time. They'll run Unbound or Bind or whatever. You can buy a small Raspberry Pi-based device called a Pi-hole that does all this for you. Or you can just, at the moment, I don't know if anybody but Bind has this, and I used to run the company that produces Bind, so I may be seen as biased. I'm not. I'm just saying that Evan Hunt from ISC told me that Bind now, Bind 9, with no config file at all, just start it up, does the right thing. You don't actually have to know how to use it in order to use it. And that's the way that I think they will all go. But since I have gotten on this topic, I will regale you a little bit further. There are two encrypted DNS protocols by which your stub resolver can reach a recursive server. And one of them is called DNS over HTTP, and the other is DNS over TLS. And they actually both use TLS, but one inserts a web layer in the middle of it all. The second of those, the DNS over HTTPS is controversial because one of the purposes that is stated in RFC 8484 in the introduction is to prevent on-path interference in DNS operations. In other words, they've noticed that a lot of people are doing ad insertion or they're messing around with your answers, but they're not doing it constructively. They're doing it for their good, not for your good. They want to make it possible for you to have a nice, clean, safe relationship with the recursive DNS server of your choice, which sounds reasonable but isn't, because all of us have things in our network that we don't know about, and we will have more things in our networks that we won't know about. It could be a real intruder. It could be a poisoned supply chain, like an ASUS motherboard BIOS update. It could be malware. It could be an IoT that is very cheap in dollars because it is taking a lot of your personal data and shipping it without your permission. Or it could just be an IoT device that, like all IoT devices, had no QA budget and is thus available for anybody to use and get inside your house and run their code. So if you have those things on your network, and statistically speaking, we all do, or we all will, giving them an uncontested path to DNS is not in our best interests. As a network operator, I have to tell you, I am an on-path party, and I intend to interfere. I'm going to monitor the DNS traffic that leaves my network, and I am going to insert policy controls in it. That's what I do. That's the commitment I made starting back in 2008 because I need to use DNS to secure other things. And DNS over HTTPS, by using a port number that is also used by all of the world's e-commerce, is intended to be hard to block. It is intended to raise my costs as a network defender because I might be the Great Firewall of China, or I might be some other oppressive overlord who wants to do bad things. Not all network operators are political oppressors. We need to keep this clearly in mind when we design our systems. So I'll be talking more about this on Friday. So if you haven't, I don't know if we have slots open, you know, on the Friday presentation, but I'll be talking some more about this then. The fact is that not everybody who wants to interfere with DNS is a criminal, and not everyone who wants to have clear path DNS outside the network operator's vision is a freedom fighter. And yet we're trending toward a binary model of a non-binary solution space. That's always a problem. And now we truly are out of time. Thank you very much for inviting me and for staying for the whole thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. Paul, for a very, very interesting talk. And for now, we have a gift for appreciation presented by Dr. Surasak Sangwanpong. Okay, before the break, we would like to have a group photo session. And first, I would like to invite the VIP. Okay, Dr. Paul Vixie, please stay on stage. Professor Kanchana Sud, the committee member of the THNIC Foundation. Associate Professor Surasak Sangwanpong. Okay. Dr. Yanyong Teng Amnoi, Assistant Professor Panchai Thantassanawong. Please come on stage, as well as our Gold Network and Fellowship sponsors. I will invite you one by one. Okay, first start with NBTC or KSTC. APNIC, Facebook, and Netflix. Anyone from Netflix? NTT Communications, TCC Technology, Symphony, AWS, and Internet Society. Okay.
Everybody, one step right, please. Okay, okay.
These are our organizers and our sponsors for this event.
Okay. Everybody, smile please. 1, 2, 3. Again, please. 1, 2, 3.
One more. Wait, one more.
Okay, everybody, one step left. Okay, okay, okay. Thank you very much. 1, 2, 3. Again, please. 1, 2, 3.
Good, thank you very much. And not yet, we will have another shot. And may I invite everyone on stage, please come down. And this time, the photographer will come on stage and take the picture of everyone. Please stay in front. And the photographer will be on stage and take a picture of everyone. And everyone, may I ask you to please stand up? Can you please stand up so you can be part of the picture and maybe come a little bit to the center? Please move. Please stand up and move a little to the center, and so that the photographer can have a picture of all of you. Please.
พี่บอกเลยค่ะว่า
ช่วยยืนนิดนึงนะคะ จะได้เก็บภาพได้นะคะแป๊บนึงค่ะแล้วเดี๋ยวไปพักค่ะโอเคหมดไหมคะหมดโอเค please move close to the center. Thank you very much. And now we have a coffee break. The coffee break will be outside, and now we ask you to please come back here in about 15 minutes. Maybe about 10:45.